The world has a lot of fears, and they all have names. The fear of wide open spaces is called agoraphobia.
I don't believe you.
The fear of spiders, arachnophobia. The fear of needles
Can you roll up your sleeve for me?
is known as trypanophobia.
Okay. Just.
And the fear of heights,
Oh my goodness, look at the view!
acrophobia. If you're afraid of the dark, you've got nyctophobia. The fear of long words is hippopotomonstrosesquipedaliophobia.
Why would they call it that?
And fear of being trapped in a confined space with no escape, claustrophobia. Most fears are bad, but there's one kind of fear that's good.
This is the biggest spider ever and I don't like it!
The fear of God. Realizing that He's powerful. He's in charge. And He loves you perfectly. When we understand this perfect love, it has a way of making us all not so afraid. So when it comes to fear, we have a choice. Fear God. Or fear everything else. Which, by the way, is called panophobia.
Anybody just panophobia? It's everything. Just scaring. You're scared to be in church. I got it. Okay. Now, you know what we're going to talk about. What's the villain today? Fear. What's the villain? Fear. Who's the ultimate hero? Jesus. Yeah. Now, I think this is interesting because I was doing a little bit of research, and Psychology Today magazine said this: fear is a vital response to physical and emotional danger. If we didn't feel it, we couldn't protect ourselves from legitimate threats. But often we fear situations that are far from life or death, and thus hang back for no good reason. Traumas or bad experiences can trigger a fear response within us that is hard to quell. Now, I think the last sentence is interesting. Yet, exposing ourselves to our personal demons is the best way to move past them. Okay? Now, I'm all for, getting honest with ourselves. We're going to talk about that. And we need to decide to expose what we're afraid of. But how many of you want to face personal demons by yourself? Just a thought. John wrote this. John, one of the disciples of Jesus, said this. 1 John 4, 17 through 18, we're going to read that. And then this is from the version, The Message. God is love. When we take up permanent residence in a life of love, we live in God, and God lives in us. This way, love has the run of the house, becomes at home and mature in us, so that we're free of worry on Judgment Day. Our standing in the world is identical with Christ. There is no room in love for fear. Well-formed love banishes fear, since fear is crippling. A fearful life, fear of death, fear of judgment, is one not yet fully formed in love. Will you read this with me? We, though are going to love and be loved. First we were loved, now we love. He loved us first. Perfect love casts out all fear. Now, I don't have any magic formulas for you today at all, but I really want to tackle this for this reason. There are outside fears like claustrophobia and spiders and snakes and heights. Anybody? All of that. There are those outside fears. But there are some of you in this room, I think I can understand pretty well. You would pretty much say, I'm not afraid of anything. In fact, some of you might be living with folks that really aren't afraid of too much, right? Until the right storm blows in, right? till the storm blows in and you're like, I didn't know I was afraid of that. Or emotions and feelings start to come about. And then you realize, I'm not as tough as I make myself out to be. This is especially true for guys, right? Guys, you're so tough. You're not afraid of anything, right? Mary had a spider in her bed the other night. She was laying in there, getting ready. It wasn't too big. It wasn't as big as the one on the screen. And and by the way, this is so cool. Don't misunderstand this. I love this. She's older. One of these days in the future, near future probably, she'll move out and be on her own. But I'm glad she's still calling for me to kill spiders, right? I am. I love being dad. Any dads in the room? I love being dad, right? I love that people need me. But here's what happens to us, guys. We get to a point where because people do need us and depend on us, we're like, well, I'm not afraid. And then when fear shows up, how quickly do we admit it? How many of you guys, when you're afraid, go to your wives and you say, honey, I'm really struggling with fear right now? Right? Would you do that? Your wife might pass out. And she would panic. She would panic. She would say, if you're afraid, things are going, this is the end of life right now. Is that right? Okay. I want to talk to you about some fear busters, but there's no magic formula. And when we do this, I need you. Not only do I want you, I need you to get down deep, because it's not a difficult story. It's pretty mind-blowing, especially when we get to the end. But it's an incredible story that and this is the truth. If Jesus is the ultimate hero, we don't have to live in fear of anything. Storms will come, but when they do, we don't have to live in fear. Look at Matthew chapter 8, verses 23 through 25. Then he got into the boat and his disciples followed him. Suddenly a furious storm came up on the lake so that the waves swept over the boat. But Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him, saying, Lord, save us. We're going to drown. The backstory is Jesus has been teaching thousands of people on the shore of Galilee all day. And he was exhausted and tired. And he decided it was time to quit teaching. Everybody needed to go home. And this is how I picture it. The sunset is beautiful that night. Purples and oranges and just beautiful hues throughout the sea coast there. In fact, we realize this is, think of it like a big lake, like Michigan, Lake Michigan or whatever. This isn't a sea. It's just a very large lake. And Jesus looks at his disciples and says, let's go to the other side. Now don't forget, there were very skilled boatsmen with him, fishermen. They knew what to do. So Jesus said, let's go to the other side. And they made their very first choice. They got in the boat. They got in the boat. When you and I see a storm coming, oftentimes we're paralyzed, aren't we? We're paralyzed by what's going on. This is the thing that's so awesome about this story. There's no paralysis in this moment. Everything looks fine. And when everything looks fine, aren't you more than willing to get in the boat with Jesus and go to the other side if you know you're not going to die? But the very first choice that we have to make is we have to decide to get in the boat with Jesus, and they did that, and they sail about, halfway across the lake maybe, but they're out of sight of land. It's gotten dark, and then the waves begin to roll in. And Matthew tells us the storm was furious, and it makes sense because the Sea of Galilee is made in such a way that there are some mountain ranges around it. The waves just blow right in out of nowhere. And Matthew tells us it was furious. It can literally be translated earthquake, When was the last time that you had a furious storm blow up in your life and it was an earthquake? Now, sometimes storms blow in and they're so quick, they just freak us out in the moment. Some are building along the way in our lives. When was the last time that you had a storm really blow in about your health, your job, your children, things that you didn't even realize? And you know what? If you're in the boat with Jesus, that sounds pretty good, doesn't it? We're in the boat with Jesus. What can go wrong? We love him. Now, the very first choice you and I have to make is to trust the ultimate hero with our lives. And we have to choose to get in. We gotta actually step in this boat with Jesus. And hopefully we do that before the storm comes. Then, like the disciples, the storm begins to rage. We're told in the scripture that the storm rages so much that the waves are starting to come in over the side of the boat. This boat would have been deeper, and the waves were coming in. It reminds me of the time that I was with Matt when he was a teenager, and our Kay's dad, my father-in-law Bob, he was living in Florida on the Tampa side, and he said, "Why don't we go fishing when you come?" And I said, "That sounds so great. I want to go fishing. That's all. How are we going to do it?" I said, "Do you have a friend?" He goes, "Well, there'll be a lot of friends." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, why don't we go out on a party boat?" That didn't sound great to me, but, I thought, all right, we'll go out on a party boat. It's cheap. Anybody understand cheap? It's just cheap. Pay $30 a piece, 20 of your favorite people you don't know. You get on the boat and you cruise out. So that's what we did. We cruised out, and it was great. In fact, before we even got to the boat, Bob said, "Let's stop and get some breakfast." So a perfect breakfast is McDonald's. I think I had a sausage, egg, and cheese, or McMuffin, or something. I think it was great. I don't really remember exactly how it went down. We got out on the water, and Bob said, "Bob, don't you love people that have assurances for you? You don't have to worry on the west side, on the Tampa side." I'd been deep sea fishing before, didn't have any issues. I'd been out on the Atlantic side. I hadn't been in the bay. And so we went and we started. Well, when we got away from the shore, the waves started to break some. And I said to Bob, I said, "Dad, how far are we going to go out?" He said, "I think we're going to go out maybe about 3 or 4 miles. That's probably not very far. We're going to go out." 15 miles later, we were out. And this is why. The way I get this scripture, I get it. The only difference is it was in the daytime. And the waves are breaking, and it's all of this, man. People, now I admit there were some people that I don't understand them. They are the fearless people who, when the waves are breaking over the boat, they're breaking out food. I don't get those fearless people. The people that I understood were like me, who turned green, and I started to throw up because, why not? McDonald's twice. When I got back, Kay looks at me. I don't like fearless bystanders. Do you? Kay looks at me and she goes, "Honey, how was it?" I said, "It was a boat ride from hell." That's exactly what I said. I went to bed at 6 o'clock that night. I did. Was that? Okay. Now, here's the thing. Before I threw up, I convinced myself I was tougher than I really was. But my stomach chose to outvote me. When was the last time you got in a boat and you didn't realize that you were in it and the storm blew up and it wasn't at all what you expected? In fact, to make matters worse, let me tell you where Jesus is in this story. Jesus is in the bottom of the boat, asleep. Now, we need to get this out of the way. How many of you live with people that if a tornado came through the middle of the house, they would never wake up? Right? How many of you live with those people? How many of you are already mad at those people? Right? Okay. I'm just checking. The disciples are awake. Jesus is in the boat. And I love the fact that this story is told in the Gospels, in 3 of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. I love it that that story is told in all 3 because we get different details. One Gospel writer tells us that Jesus was not only asleep, sound out in the bottom of the boat, but his head was on a cushion. A cushion was reserved for people that were honored guests. Jesus is sound out in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. A boat that had been, they had pushed a boat out earlier as a pulpit. So the pulpit where he was speaking just hours before now has become a pit of fear and despair for the disciples. And they think that Jesus is neglecting them. First fear buster, are you ready? Say it with me. Remember, Jesus is always with you. If they would have never woke Jesus up, they would have got to the other side. How many of you know that? How many of you know that in your own lives, that no matter what's going on in the midst of the storm, if Jesus is your ultimate hero, you're going to move through to the other side? It's in that moment of fear that we have to decide, what are we really going to do? What are we going to do? Are we going to trust that Jesus is really with us? Now, if we haven't invited Jesus to be the ultimate hero of our lives, we don't have any out. We've got no one to trust. Oftentimes we say that the opposite of fear is faith. And that's true. But in that faith has to be trust, not just when the seas are calm, but especially when the storms come. I'm going to trust him. That's what's going to counteract everything that I don't understand. I have to remember that Jesus is with me. And I want you to look at this next passage, Matthew 8:26-27. He replied, "You of little faith, why are you so afraid?" Then he got up and rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. The men were amazed and asked, "What kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him." All my life, I've heard this story. I heard it first in Sunday school as a little boy. And this is how it was always brought to me. This is how it was always taught. Jesus is amazing. He's so loving. It's so awesome. And the storms were raging, and sweet Jesus got up out of the boat and waved his hand, and everything was just peaceful, and everyone was like, oh. That's how it's taught. We miss something, because before Jesus ever gets up out of the bottom of the boat and raises his head from the cushion, he's got a question. He's got a question for the disciples, because in the Greek, this is how it goes. They're freaking out. Now, come on. You define how freak out looks to you. You define it. And just remember, when it happens, we've got a lot of reasons why the fear is justified. Well, how many of you have heard this? You're trying to help somebody who's afraid and full of panic, and they're overwhelmed with their emotions. Who's heard this before? When you try to help, somebody says, "But you don't know what I'm going through." Right? Okay, well, you know what I've learned to say? Yeah, I may not know what you're going through, but I have another question as a pastor since I'm up here. How many of you have ever been through a storm? Raise your hand. Leave them up. Look around. We may not get wait, don't put them down. I know, listen, this is the aerobics for the morning. Right? Listen. Somebody may not know exactly what you're going through, but if you've been through a storm and made it on the other side by trusting the ultimate hero, you get it. You can put them down. We make up all kind of excuses because it's not about what people are trying to do. Have you heard this one before? Don't help me. I don't need any help. Really? Really, you don't need any help. How about the disciples? This is one of the coolest things I think about these guys. They're freaking out. They're panicked. The waves are rolling over the boat. At least they knew who to cry out to. They knew to cry out to Jesus. They knew to cry out. Who do you cry out to when you're struggling? Do you cry out to Jesus, or do you just go to your friends? And I know you've never done this. You ever just get somebody on the phone to complain more? I'm in a storm. I am freaking out. I'm going to die. What do you think? Wouldn't you? It's great. I hope we all have friends like this. I think you are going to die. I think you're right. I hope you don't have friends like that. I really don't. They knew who to call out to. Now, I don't think it made anybody feel any better that they thought Jesus wasn't paying attention. He's asleep. You ever had that before? So there's a noise in the house. You go to wake up your spouse. Did you hear that? No, I'm asleep. No, I didn't hear it. Well, are you awake now? Jesus, before he ever gets his head off the pillow, he asks this question, and I think it's beautiful. You of little faith, why are you so afraid? If we want to truly be people full of life, we have to decide to trust Jesus and answer the question. What are you really afraid of? Okay, guys, we're going to have to get honest, and we don't have a lot of partners to do that with, do we? We're afraid to tell our wives. You hear that? We're afraid to tell our wives because we don't want them to freak out or they won't understand. Who's our accountability partner? Who are we going to talk to about the fears that we have, about when our kids get older and when they go off to college? How about it, moms and dads? What are we going to do when our kids are being attacked and bullied at school? What are we going to do when there are struggles in our relationship? Anybody ever have any marriage issues? Aren't you glad I didn't say raise your hand? Right? Who are we going to go talk to? What are we going to do? Here's the second fear buster. Say it with me. Rely on Jesus to save you. But that is not code language for you don't have to work at this. We got to get honest. Before Jesus ever got up off the pillow, here's what Jesus did. He said, answer the question. If you were out in the lobby with Jesus today and you were just having a cup of coffee and he was sitting out there with you and he said, hey, tell me all your fears, would you just go, man, I've been waiting for somebody to ask? Would you tell him? I'm concerned about our budget. I'm concerned about some of the choices that we've made. I'm not sure that things are going the way that I want them to go. What about my health? Anybody struggle with their health? Wow. Who do we get honest with? Well, I love the fact that the disciples panicked together. At least they had each other, and I'm not kidding. They were there. They had each other. But Jesus gets up out of the boat. They knew who to call out to, and Jesus rebukes the wind and the waves. Peace be still, some of our gospel writers say. He says, peace be still. But remember this, Jesus wasn't rebuking his disciples. He rebuked the wind and the waves. He wanted his disciples to trust him. Do you really trust Jesus in everything? Especially the things that aren't working out. No fear. Only trust. Only faith. And that's a hard one. Because when you're in the middle of the storm, it's tough to trust. And when you're not in a storm, it's easy. But it feels like everything's going to be fine. But Jesus is the ultimate hero. We can't rely on our kryptonite, can we? Man, that's really something, right? Tempted to go back to our kryptonite instead of let him kill it and trust him. We have to rely on Jesus to save us. No fear. Now, I want to do this before we stop today. That would be a great place, wouldn't it? It would be a great place just to stop right here. But I want to show you something that we don't often do. We take a passage of Scripture, pastor preaches 3 or 4 hours on a few verses. But there's a part I want you to see. I want you to go to the next piece, Matthew 8, 28 through 29. Let's move right to that. When he arrived at the other side in the region of Gadarenes, 2 demon-possessed men come from the tombs to meet him. They were so violent that no one could pass that way. "What do you want with us, Son of God?" they shouted. "Have you come here to torture us before the appointed time?" Wow, isn't that a great passage? Isn't that one of the ones you'd love to memorize Scripture from? Now, did you hear? They went to the other side. Different writers write it a little differently. We're going to see that. They get to the other side, and when they get to the other side, here's where they get out of the boat, into a cemetery. From raging sea to cemetery, that makes perfect sense. And it's scattered with tombs. And of all things, where do demon-possessed people live? In cemeteries. At least in this region. And it's incredible. Let me show you this. Let's look at Mark's description in his gospel, chapter 5, verses 1 through 5. They went across the lake to the region of Gadarenes. It's the same region, it's the same setting, same place. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. Awesome. Now think about it. The minute you get out of the boat, there's some demon-possessed people. Mark focuses on one in particular. It's a man who's naked. He's naked, no chains, nothing. He's just naked guy running around, bruised, bloody, cutting himself, possessed by a demon. I have a question. Would you rather be in a boat swamped with water thinking you're going to die, or confront demon-possessed people in a cemetery? Now, folks, listen. Too many times, hold on, this is one of the most important things I'm going to say today. Most of the time when we ask God to get us out of the storm, we're doing it for this reason. We want peace in our lives. Makes perfect sense. We want peace in our lives. But it's almost like, Jesus, save me from this storm and any other storms. And Jesus is like, nope. The reason that you move through this storm with me is because I want you to learn to trust me, because there will be more what? Storms. There will be more difficulties. There might even be a cemetery in your future with demon-possessed people. Are you all right? I love this. I love it. How tough are you now? Listen, I think I'm pretty tough. I'm not afraid of too many things. I'd have been throwing up on the Sea of Galilee. Tampa Bay proved it. In between throwing up, I would have been saying, Jesus, get up now. Right? And some of you are sitting here going, Pastor, I wouldn't have ever thrown up in the boat. What's the matter with you? That's great. I'm glad you're that, tough. Great. How would you have been in the cemetery? You get out of the boat, you walk in, the disciples, this is what I think is going on. I think the disciples are going, isn't this great? Shore. We've landed on shore. I feel so much better. Demon-possessed man walks up to Jesus. I'm like, can we go get in the boat? Can we go back? Now, It gets really weird. Did you think it was weird yet? It gets really weird. Mark 5, 6 through 13. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me? Jesus, Son of the Most High God. In God's name, don't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" I told you it gets weird. His name is Legion. I want you, can we stop? Let me tell you why his name is Legion. Is because he is filled with numerous demonic spirits, not just one. Whoa. How many of you think the Bible is more interesting right now? "My name is Legion," he replied. Read it with me, please. "For we are many." And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. A large herd of pigs were feeding on the nearby hillside. The demons begged Jesus, "Send us among the pigs, allow us to go into them." He gave them permission, and the impure spirits came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. Wow. Okay. This is one of the coolest, most powerful, fear-buster passages in Scripture. Are you ready? In a weird way, I am thankful that the demons know that Jesus is the ultimate hero. You? I'm grateful that Jesus is the ultimate hero. And here's what the demon knew. They not only knew who Jesus was, but here's what the demon knew. The demon knew that a time is coming in the future when all evil will be shut down. Now you're like, why not now? Why can't we have it now? Because we have this amazing opportunity to learn to trust Jesus in the midst of our fears. We're not robots. Jesus gives us the opportunity to trust him in the middle of what we're going through. And don't compare your fears with other people. Don't try to one-up your fears with other people. Well, if that's what you're going through, listen to this. I was in a boat and then there were demons. How do you top that? No. There isn't any one-ups. Whatever you're going through, it's tough, it's difficult. Here's the question. Are you going to trust in your own self to get through it and be tough enough? Or are we going to realize there are circumstances that we can't be tough enough in, and we need an ultimate hero, Jesus Christ? That's what it's about. I'm going to trust him. Now, there's something else in this passage that's awesome. Jesus healed the man. He cast the demons out into pigs. Anybody interested in that part? Why pigs? Well, first of all, we realize it's not a Jewish community. It's a Gentile community because they're keeping pigs. It's a whole cultural thing. If you read in Mark far enough, and we don't have time to do it this morning, go read it this afternoon. If we read in Mark far enough, here's what we're going to see. Jesus cast the demons out because it wasn't time just to obliterate all evil. It's coming. Someday he's coming back. And we need to know him as the ultimate hero now. But what Jesus did do was bring freedom. Never forget this. And here's the third fear buster. Say it with me. Refuse to let your now overwhelm your wow. Don't get caught up in the emotion of the now. Don't get caught up in how you feel now. Don't get caught up in how you think things are going to turn out now, because when we're afraid and we don't think things are going to turn out, you know what we start to do? We self-medicate with negative thoughts. This will never work out. It's going to be fine. I didn't really expect it anyway. Really? If you didn't expect and hopeful anyway, what were you hoping for? No. Refuse to let your what? Now overwhelm your Wow. When Jesus calmed the storm on the sea in the boat, the disciples stepped back and said, who is this man that he can calm the sea and the waves? When the man was healed and the demons were cast out, naked, bruised, cut, he goes up to Jesus and he says, can I go with you? He understood no matter what Jesus was going to go through, it was better than being demon-possessed by a legion of demons naked in a cemetery. Have any of you been saved from anything that you're grateful for? Right? Here's what Jesus says. No. Now, I need you to go to declare the majesty of God in the 10 cities. And the man goes, okay. Why? Because he had met Jesus Christ. Now think about it. When the owners of the pigs found out what Jesus did, they weren't in awe. They were mad. They came to the cemetery and told Jesus to leave. What do you do when you tell the ultimate hero to leave? But you know what? We do it all the time, don't we, when we're afraid? I don't need you, Jesus. I don't need to get honest about my fears. I don't really need help. I can keep with this habit. I don't have to really, I've got this habit under control. Can anybody relate to anything I'm saying? Right? I don't need any help. I'm good with this. You know what we're saying? We're saying we become comfortable with our fears. Never become comfortable with your fears, because Jesus wants to give us life and life to the full. They told Jesus to leave, but the man went and he praised God. And the question this morning is this simple question. Are you ready to give all your fears to Jesus? You'll never be without storms, but you can give all your fears to Jesus if you're willing.